The courtroom fell silent as Brindle, a battle-scarred German shepherd with deep amber eyes, limped toward Clara Mae Whitlow's bench. The judge's wheelchair gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, a stark reminder of her paralysis. Whispers rippled through the crowd as the dog stopped just inches from her, ignoring Frank Cotter's commands to return to his owner. Retired Sergeant Colt Remington sat at the defendant's table, his prosthetic leg visible beneath his worn suit pants, his trembling hands betraying the fear of a man facing years behind bars. Brindle locked eyes with Clara Mae, something ancient passing between them. Then, with deliberate gentleness, the dog placed his paw directly on her paralyzed leg. A collective gasp echoed through the courtroom. Clara Mae's hand flew to her mouth. For the first time in 3 years, she felt something the faintest pressure warm and alive, where there should have been nothing but emptiness. Colt Remington hadn't always been a desperate man. 8 months ago, he'd been managing not thriving, just surviving. The modest military pension covered the basics. The small 2-bedroom ranch on the outskirts of Pine Ridge Utilities food for himself and Brindle, and the medications that kept his phantom limb pain at bearable levels. His military benefits covered most medical needs, though the red tape often left him exhausted and frustrated. At 42, Colt's weathered face carried the lines of a man a decade older. Afghanistan had taken more than his right leg below the knee. The explosion that nearly killed him also claimed 4 members of his unit, leaving invisible scars that surfaced in night terrors and in moments when a car backfiring could catapult him back to that hellish battlefield. Brindle had been there too, dragging him to safety despite shrapnel wounds along his own flank. Military protocol dictated that service dogs remain with their handlers when possible, so when Colt received his medical discharge, Brindle came home. The dog transitioned from detecting explosives to detecting Colt's PTSD episodes, waking him from nightmares or providing grounding pressure during flashbacks. Their mornings never varied at 5 a.m. Alarm coffee for Colt Premium Kibble for Brindle, the one luxury Colt never compromised on, followed by a 3-mile walk around Lancaster Park. Now 7. Brindle moved with the dignified pace of a veteran himself, muzzle graying but amber eyes alert and watchful. "You're the only one who really gets it, aren't you, Brindle?" Colt murmured during their walks, and the dog's ears perked at his voice. Pine Ridge existed in the shadow of Fort Harrison, close enough for economic benefit from the base, yet far enough that civilians and military personnel mostly lived separate lives. Main Street displayed faded American flags year-round, and "We support our troops" signs at best. One exception was his neighbor Amos Thatcher, a 68-year-old Vietnam veteran living alone in a meticulously kept cottage next door. Amos had taken Colt under his wing when he first moved to Pine Ridge, offering practical guidance through VA bureaucracy and quiet companionship on days when words were too much effort. "The worst wounds are the ones nobody can see," Amos once told him during a particularly rough stretch. "That's why they gave you Brindle. That dog sees everything you try to hide from the rest of us." Clara Mae Whitlow had her own invisible scars. At 58, she had built a reputation for fairness, tempered with strict adherence to the law during her 15 years on the bench. The car accident 3 years ago that severed her spinal cord changed everything except her determination. She returned to work faster than her doctors recommended her wheelchair, now an extension of her formidable presence. Few knew that before law school, marriage, and subsequent divorce, Clara Mae had served as Lieutenant Morgan, a military nurse with Desert Storm tours. That chapter of her life had been closed for decades until the day a German shepherd approached her bench and awakened something long dormant. The day Brindle collapsed changed everything. Colt had been making breakfast scrambled eggs for himself, a scoop of kibble for Brindle, when a car backfired on the street outside. The sudden noise flung Colt back to Afghanistan, searing heat, burning metal, the screams of his teammates. His coffee mug shattered against the linoleum as he dropped to the floor, body responding to danger long past. Brindle was instantly at his side, pressing his warm weight against Colt's chest, licking his face, pulling him back to the present with gentle persistence. It was their familiar dance, Colt falling into the abyss of memory, Brindle pulling him back. Only this time, as Colt's breathing steadied and the kitchen came back into focus, Brindle made an unusual whimper and collapsed beside him. Brindle Buddy Colt's voice cracked as he ran hands over the dog's body. His breathing was labored eyes unfocused. "Hang on, boy. Just hang on." The 20-minute drive to Pinewood Veterinary Clinic became the longest of Colt's life. He ran red lights, took corners too fast. One hand on the wheel, the other on Brindle's head in the passenger seat. "Stay with me, buddy. Please, stay with me." Doc Gideon Holloway met them at the entrance, alerted by Colt's panicked call. Her clinic was small, but respected the only practice within 30 miles with experience treating military service dogs. "He just collapsed," Colt explained, voice hollow, as he watched Doc Holloway examine Brindle. He was fine. And then he wasn't. The diagnosis came after blood tests, and an echocardiogram dilated cardiomyopathy, a condition where the heart enlarges and can't pump efficiently. Treatable with medication and careful management, but grim, without immediate intervention. "He needs to start these medications right away," Doc Gideon Holloway said, handing Colt Remington a prescription. "There's a surgical option too, but it's specialized. They do it at the Veterinary Teaching Hospital in Phoenix." Colt nodded, barely trusting himself to speak. When Doc Holloway gently mentioned the cost, $4,800 for the medications, the first year, $12,000 for the surgery, the floor seemed to fall out from under him. There must be programs, he finally said, for service dogs, military dogs. There were, but most had long waiting lists or required endless paperwork. Brindle needed help now. Colt started with the Veterans Service Office. "I'm sorry, Mr. Remington," the representative said politely. "VA benefits don't cover service animal health care beyond initial placement costs." Next, he tried charities. Some were sympathetic, but had limited funds. Others were already committed elsewhere. Desperation drove him to the Pine Ridge Community Center, applying for emergency assistance where he first met Rufus Lane. As director, Rufus had the authority to approve emergency funds from the Community Welfare Program. "A dog," Rufus said, reviewing the application, the word dripping with dismissal. "Mr. Remington, these funds are for human emergencies, housing, utilities, food." "Brindle isn't just a dog," Colt pleaded. "He's a certified service animal. He saved 6 lives in Afghanistan, including mine. Now he saves me every day when the PTSD hits." Rufus leaned back in his chair, impeccably dressed, polished charm, masking a small-town political hardness. "The fund committee would never approve this," he said. "Dogs have a natural lifespan. Perhaps it's time to consider—" "Don't," Colt interrupted sharply. "Don't even say it." Rufus shrugged. "I'm just being practical. We have kids here who need dental care, seniors who can't afford heat. I can't in good conscience divert resources to veterinary care, no matter how attached you are to the animal." The conversation ended there, but the cold calculation behind Rufus's sympathetic facade lingered in Colt's mind long after he left. Over the next month, Colt sold everything he could: his father's watch, his TV, his laptop. He picked up odd jobs, handyman work, night shifts at the gas station, anything that accepted his limitations and paid cash. Amos Thatcher helped where he could, though living on a fixed income himself. Brindle started on the bare minimum of medications Doc Holloway could prescribe. Some days were better than others. On good days, Brindle still walked beside Colt, alert if a bit slower. On bad days, he lay on his bed, breathing labored eyes following Colt around the room. "We're going to get through this." Colt promised, sitting on the floor beside him. "We got through worse in Kandahar, didn't we?" But reality was inescapable. Without the full medication regimen and eventually surgery, Brindle was living on borrowed time. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night when Brindle had a severe episode. His breathing became labored enough that Colt rushed him to the emergency vet in neighboring Carleton County. Overnight oxygen therapy stabilized him, but added another $600 to Colt's mounting debt. "He needs the full medication protocol," the vet insisted, and frankly, he should be evaluated for surgery sooner rather than later. Colt nodded numbly. Brindle's heavy head resting on his lap in the clinic's consultation room. He had exactly $43.27 in his checking account. The medication Brindle needed would cost over $400 for a month's supply. That night, after settling Brindle at home, Colt sat at the kitchen table staring at empty pill bottles. His own pain meds had run out 2 weeks ago. He'd been rationing, taking half doses to stretch them further. He hadn't refilled because every spare dollar went to Brindle's care. In the darkest hour of the night, desperation crowded out reason. Carleton County had a 24-hour pharmacy attached to the hospital. The security was better than the local drugstore, but not impenetrable. Colt had tactical training. He knew how to move silently, avoid detection. He never considered stealing money that would make him a thief in the traditional sense, but taking medicine just enough to keep Brindle alive until a solution could be found felt different somehow. A moral gray area in a world with no good choices. He waited until 2 a.m., when the pharmacy was quietest. Dressed in dark clothes, nothing identifying him, he moved with precision. His prosthetic leg made silent movement challenging, but years of adaptation taught him how to minimize sound. The pharmacy's back entrance had a security camera, but it was positioned high, focused on faces. Colt kept his head-down baseball cap pulled low. The lock was simple, designed to keep out opportunists, not determined intruders with military training. Inside, he moved quickly to the medication shelves. Veterinary meds resembled human heart medications enough that he knew what to pick. He took only what Brindle needed. No painkillers, nothing with street value, nothing that could mark him as an addict or dealer. He was almost done when headlights swept across the backlot. Colt froze, then made a split-second decision to exit through a side door. In his rush, Colt Remington accidentally knocked over a whole rack of vitamin bottles. The crash echoed like thunder through the dead silent pharmacy. 36 hours later, 2 officers showed up at Colt's front door with a warrant. The security camera footage hadn't caught his face clearly, but the unmistakable limp caused by his prosthetic leg was all they needed to mark him as a suspect. And once they discovered the stolen medication stashed inside an old coffee can in his kitchen, the case seemed open and shut. "Colt Remington, you're under arrest for burglary and theft of controlled substances," one of the officers read aloud, while Brindle let out a worried whine from his bed across the room. "You have the right to remain silent." Colt barely heard the rest. His only thought as they slapped the cuffs on was for Brindle. "My neighbor, please," he pleaded. "Amos Thatcher. Tell him to take care of my dog." What Colt couldn't have known then was that this arrest would bring him before Judge Clara Mae Whitlow and set into motion a chain of events that would alter all their lives forever. The Fort Rock Courthouse stood like a relic of the past among the town's newer buildings, a 3-story brick monument with towering white columns and tall windows that had watched over a century of justice. Colt had driven past it countless times, never imagining he'd one day walk through its doors as a defendant. 3 days after his arrest, he sat stiffly beside his overworked public defender, Daisy Pike. The wooden bench dug into his back, and his prosthetic leg ached after the long wait in the holding cell, but none of that mattered. All he could think about was Brindle. I spoke to Amos, Daisy told him, after making a call he begged for. He's got Brindle. But your dog's medication regimen, it's not something he can keep up with forever. We need to get you out fast. The courtroom doors creaked open. All rise for the Honorable Judge Clara Mae Whitlow, the bailiff called. Everyone stood as Judge Whitlow rolled herself to the bench, her black robes pristine, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. Her reputation for ironclad rulings was well known. Colt's hope dwindled. A judge known for coming down hard on crime wouldn't care why someone broke into a pharmacy, only that they did. As Judge Whitlow called the courtroom to order the door at the back opened again, Colt turned. Amos Thatcher came in leaning on his cane. And beside him, Colt's chest tightened. Brindle, wearing his service vest, was at his side. Amos must have convinced someone the dog needed to be here. Your Honor, Daisy began standing. On behalf of the defendant, we request reasonable bail taking into account my client's financial limitations and deep ties to the community. The prosecutor, Jed Raleigh, didn't miss a beat. Your Honor, Mr. Remington broke into a pharmacy and stole prescription drugs. The fact that they were heart meds and not narcotics doesn't lessen the seriousness. We ask bail be set at $25,000. Judge Whitlow reviewed the documents in front of her face, unreadable. Mr. Remington, she said at last, you're charged with burglary, theft of controlled substances, and property damage. These are serious accusations. Do you understand that? Yes, Your Honor, Colt replied, voice firm despite the knot in his chest. Given your military service and lack of criminal history, she continued, I'm setting bail at $10,000. From the gallery, Brindle let out a soft whine. Amos tried to calm him, but the dog's eyes were locked on Colt, and he tugged gently at the leash. Mr. Thatcher, Judge Whitlow, said sharply, that animal needs to be quiet or leave the courtroom. He's a registered service dog, Your Honor, Amos explained. He's been apart from his handler for 3 days. The judge's gaze flicked to Brindle, noting the vest. Very well. He may stay if he remains quiet. But Brindle was restless. He whined again, louder this time. Judge Whitlow shot him a glare. Mr. Thatcher, I warned you, what happened next would be talked about in Fort Rock for years. Brindle broke free from Amos's grip and limped forward fast. The bailiff moved to intercept, but froze when Judge Whitlow raised her hand. The shepherd stopped right in front of the judge, his amber eyes locked on hers. Not blinking. Not moving. I'm sorry, Your Honor, Daisy said quickly. This wasn't planned. Judge Whitlow raised a hand, silencing her. Her eyes were on Brindle, as sharp as his own. This is highly irregular, she said softly, but I suspect there's more to this case than what's on paper. Brindle inched closer, lifting a paw and gently resting it on the footrest of her wheelchair. Your Honor, Colt called out, unable to hold back. He's the reason I did what I did. Brindle's dying. He needs that medicine. I couldn't afford it. His voice cracked. He saved my life in Afghanistan. He still saves it every single day. Without him, I don't make it. Judge Whitlow's expression shifted just slightly. Mr. Remington, she said, her voice quieter now. I understand the bond between a service animal and their handler. But breaking the law. Then Brindle did something no one expected. He stepped closer and gently placed his paw on the judge's motionless leg. The entire courtroom gasped. Judge Whitlow looked down, stunned. Your Honor, Colt whispered. Brindle was trained to sense pain, detect distress, and bring comfort skills that had saved lives in war zones, and now somehow were working their quiet magic in a courtroom. He's trying to help you, Amos Thatcher said softly. For a fleeting moment, Judge Clara Mae Whitlow looked lost in thought. Her hand, almost without thinking, drifted to rest gently on Brindle's head. A moment of silence passed thick with emotion. Then reality snapped back into focus. Straightening her back with practiced resolve, she cleared her throat. "Bailiff," she said, voice noticeably softer, "please assist Mr. Thatcher in retrieving the service animal." Her eyes shifted back to Colt Remington. "Mr. Remington, I'm setting bail at $5,000 with the condition that you check in daily with the court officer." Colt exhaled shakily. It was still far more than he had in his pocket, but far less than it could have been. A step forward, a crack in the wall. As Amos guided Brindle back toward the gallery, Judge Whitlow added firmly, "Mr. Remington, have your attorney provide official documentation of your dog's medical condition and needs. The court may be able to direct you to appropriate support programs. It wasn't freedom. It wasn't a cure." But for the first time in days, Colt felt something he hadn't dared to hope for, a spark of mercy. As the guards escorted him back toward the holding cell, Daisy Pike caught up to him just long enough to whisper, "Something unusual just happened back there." I've never seen Judge Whitlow change her ruling mid-decision. And her comment about resources, that's not something she ever does. Colt glanced back over his shoulder, his voice trying to stay light, despite the turmoil inside him. Brindle has a way of getting to people. Neither of them knew what had just begun. Alone in her chambers, Judge Clara Mae Whitlow sat still, her eyes fixed on her motionless legs. She could still feel the faint weight of the dog's paw. Still sense that fleeting, impossible warmth. 3 years. 3 years without sensation below the waist. And yet, later that afternoon, Judge Whitlow picked up her office phone and made a call she had never made before. "Mr. Thatcher," she said, voice formal, composed. "I've reviewed Mr. Remington's file again, and I have a proposition. One that may better serve both justice and humanity." There was a pause on the line. "Would you be willing," she continued, "to bring Mr. Remington and his service dog to my home once bail is posted? I believe there may be an alternative to incarceration that warrants consideration." Amos didn't hesitate. "I'll make sure Colt gets there, Your Honor. And Brindle, too." 3 days later, Colt's bail was paid anonymously. The clerk wouldn't say who posted it, confidentiality policy. Daisy guessed it might be a veterans organization. Colt figured Amos had called in a favor. Only Judge Whitlow and her clerk knew the truth. The $5,000 had come straight from the judge's own personal account. That Saturday, Colt and Brindle arrived at a modest Victorian house tucked away on Maple Street. Amos Thatcher had driven them, keeping the mood steady with quiet encouragement. "I don't get it," Colt muttered nervously as they pulled up. "Why would she want me at her house? This even legal?" Amos gave a quiet chuckle. Before she was the toughest judge in Fort Rock, Elizabeth Whitlow was the toughest nurse in Desert Storm. If she's bending the rules, it's because something matters. Judge Whitlow answered the door herself, maneuvering her wheelchair with practiced ease. Gone were the robes and gravitas, just a blue blouse, simple slacks, and a face that looked more human than Colt had ever seen from the bench. "Mr. Remington, Mr. Thatcher," she nodded with calm welcome. "And of course Brindle. Please come in." Her home was cozy and warm, not stark like the courtroom. Bookshelves lined the walls. Framed photos told quiet stories. Colt noticed one showing a younger Elizabeth Whitlow in uniform confirmation of Amos's words. Once they were seated, she didn't waste time. "I've reviewed your case in full, Mr. Remington," she said. "Breaking into a pharmacy is still a crime, regardless of motive. But I also believe incarceration would fail justice in this case." She wheeled closer, her eyes meeting his. "I'm prepared to offer an alternative. Community service under my supervision right here. You'll perform maintenance and accessibility work in and around this home. 20 hours a week. 6 months. It'll count as time served, and if you complete it, your sentence will be suspended. Colt blinked. I don't understand, Your Honor. Elizabeth, please, she said gently, gesturing around her house. This place needs work. The ramp's unstable. The bathroom's impossible. You have skills I need, and I have authority that can help you and Brindle stay together. But why? Colt asked, eyes narrowing in disbelief. She looked down at Brindle, who was watching her quietly. Let's just say I have my reasons, she murmured. Do we have an agreement? Colt nodded slowly. Still stunned, still confused, but somehow deeply grateful. As if sensing the shift, Brindle padded forward and rested his head gently on her lap. There it was again. That sensation. Not pain, not pressure, but something that had no business being there. A whisper of feeling, a medical impossibility. And yet, in that moment it felt like the start of a miracle. Their new arrangement began like clockwork. Each morning, Colt and Brindle arrived at 8 a.m. sharp. The judge would leave a written list: repair this railing, adjust the threshold, widen this doorway. By afternoon, Colt had completed each task with military-grade precision. Doc Gideon Holloway, moved by the story, began supplying Brindle's meds at a reduced price, quietly, discreetly. No one spoke aloud about what else was happening, but everyone noticed that the dog now waited by the window 20 minutes before Colt arrived, that the judge no longer seemed quite so alone, that something inside her had changed, and that maybe, just maybe, he was changing her life as much as she was saving his. Colt Remington looked up from under the sink, wiping sweat off his brow with the back of his wrist. Feels like he's got your calendar memorized, he said with a chuckle. Clara Mae Whitlow, who had insisted he use her first name once they started working together, allowed a rare smile. Service dogs are good at routines, she said, but deep down she knew it wasn't just that. Every evening, Brindle would rest his head gently on her lap, his amber eyes locked with hers in that haunting, soulful stare. And every time she'd feel that same impossible flicker of something, some ghost of sensation in her legs where there should have been nothing. Not pain, not pressure, just something. 2 weeks into their arrangement, Colt showed up one morning to find her still home, seated by the front window in her wheelchair. Court was canceled, she explained, glancing over her shoulder. Plumbing issue at the courthouse? She hesitated, clearly uneasy. I was wondering if you'd help me with something. A little more personal than leaky sinks. Colt nodded and set down his tools. Of course. She wheeled toward the hallway. Follow me. They entered a small, dusty room, unrenovated, untouched. Resistance bands, weights, and parallel bars sat quietly like forgotten promises. I kept up with therapy after the crash for about a year, she said softly. Then the doctors told me there was no hope of recovery. So I quit. There was a crack in her voice, vulnerability she rarely let anyone hear. Lately, I've started feeling things. Probably just phantom sensations, but still. She met his gaze. Would you help me get a routine going again? I assume you went through plenty of PT yourself. Colt gave a slow, understanding nod. We'll figure it out. And so a new rhythm began. Each morning, Colt supported her as she stood between the parallel bars, coaxing movement from muscles long dormant. He guided her through careful stretches, adjusting positions to reduce strain. Brindle watched every session like a guardian, nudging her leg gently whenever she faltered or her breathing changed. In Afghanistan, Colt said during one particularly brutal session, "My unit used to say, pain is just weakness leaving the body." Clara grunted, sweat glistening on her forehead as she pushed herself upright. Sounds like something a Marine would say. Army Colt corrected with mock indignation. though I'll admit jarheads do get off some good lines." They both laughed. A real laugh. It felt strange and welcome. For Clara, it was the first time in years she wasn't just a judge in a black robe or a woman in a wheelchair, she was just herself. For Colt, it was the first time he'd truly connected with anyone besides Brindle since coming home from war. Brick by brick, the walls they had each built were starting to come down. In the third week, Clara finally told him about the night that changed her life. It was pouring, she began. One of those summer storms that turns every road into a river. I was heading home from a late court session when a truck veered across the line. Her hands gripped the parallel bars tighter. The driver was texting. 22 years old. He walked away without a scratch. Colt said nothing, just listened. He came to the hospital. Wanted to apologize. I told the nurse to send him away. Her jaw tightened. Later, I sentenced him 2 years for reckless driving. People said I should have recused myself, but no one filed a complaint. Colt hesitated, then asked, "Was it enough?" Clara's eyes drifted toward the window. "No," she said quietly. "Nothing would have been enough. Not when he walked away on legs I'll never use again." Then came the fourth week, and with it the first crack in the fragile peace they'd found. Rufus Lane, head of the local council, stood up during a town hall meeting. "While we all respect Judge Whitlow's dedication," he said sharply during the public comment period, "there are serious ethical concerns about a sitting judge offering what amounts to private employment to a former defendant using taxpayer resources without oversight." The words rippled through Fort Rock like wildfire. The local paper ran a front-page headline questioning whether Clara Mae Whitlow had crossed a line. Anonymous comments online hinted at impropriety. The next morning, Clara sat at her kitchen table reading the article. She handed it to Colt without a word. "My discretion as a judge is well within the bounds of law," she said. "Mr. Lane can object all he wants. Doesn't mean I'm wrong." But Colt noticed the change. Her jaw clenched tighter now when she spoke his name. He finally asked, "You two have history?" Clara exhaled through her nose, annoyance sharp. "Rufus Lane has opposed every single thing I've tried to do for local veterans. Every initiative blocked. Claims the budget's tight until it's his project." From the corner, Brindle lifted his head and let out a low, unsettling growl. It was rare. The kind of warning sound Colt hadn't heard since deployment. "What is it, buddy?" he asked quietly. Brindle didn't move. His amber eyes were fixed on the window, unmoving. Watching. Waiting. Later that week, Colt Remington arrived to find Clara Mae Whitlow seated at her dining table, poring over a stack of old files. "Military records?" he asked, recognizing the distinct formatting. Clara gave a small nod. Something about Rufus Lane's obsession with us didn't sit right. He mentioned once his father had served, so I dug into some archives. She tapped the top document, her brow furrowed. Eli Cormack, defense contractor. There was a scandal years ago, faulty body armor. Soldiers died. Colt froze. "You mean the Thompson Protection Systems case?" Clara looked up sharply. "You know it. Everyone who served in Afghanistan knows it," Colt said, voice tightening. "The ceramic plates were defective. 3 guys in the unit before mine didn't come home." She flipped to a specific page. Internal memos showed they knew about the flaws, but pushed them through anyway. I presided over part of that trial. I sentenced Eli Cormack to 8 years for criminal negligence and fraud. "He only served 5, Colt muttered. A grim realization dawned on his face. "And Rufus Lane is his son." Clara gathered the papers slowly, her eyes steely. "Explains a lot, doesn't it?" As spring rolled into summer, the bond between them deepened. What had started as community service now felt more like kinship, grounded in shared trauma resilience and an unlikely sense of peace. Colt began opening up about his deployment, not the filtered versions he told civilians, but the raw truths, the chaos, the brothers lost, and the parts of himself he left behind. Clara listened without flinching, occasionally sharing glimpses of her own military past as a nurse. One evening, as Brindle rested his head on her lap, she spoke softly. "He doesn't see the chair. Just me." Colt smiled. That's his gift, seeing what really matters. The exercises were showing signs of progress. Clara had begun feeling steady pressure in her thighs. Not movement, but sensation. Doc Gideon Holloway, who'd joined their little circle as Brindle's vet and informal counselor, remained cautious, but encouraged. The brain is full of surprises, he told them. Belief can be a powerful medicine. By mid-June, Clara was able to stand briefly between the parallel bars with Colt's support. When she held her balance for a full minute, Colt showed up the next day with cupcakes. When Brindle's heart check came back strong, Clara ordered pizza. Then came the first letter. No return address. One sheet of paper. A typed message, as comes for those who pervert it. Clara almost dismissed it. Judges got threats, occupational hazard. But she showed it to Colt anyway. The second letter came a week later. Those who cannot stand should not stand in judgment. This one cut deeper. It wasn't just a threat. It was personal. Colt didn't wait. "We're putting up cameras," he said, mounting the first one above the porch that same afternoon. Better paranoid than sorry. The third message wasn't a letter. It was a dead bird. Its neck broken. Left on the wheelchair ramp. Brindle found it first barking until Colt came running. Colt's voice was steel. "This ends now. We're calling it in." Boone McAllister took their statement, but seemed skeptical. "No direct threat. Could be neighborhood kids playing pranks." With a dead bird, Colt snapped. The officer shrugged. "We'll increase patrols." That night, Clara sat in her living room, Colt beside her, Brindle at her feet. "I've handed down hundreds of sentences over the years," she said softly. "Made my fair share of enemies. But this feels different." Colt's face was tight. "Right after Rufus Lane's smear campaign, doesn't feel like coincidence. Without evidence, it's still an accusation," Clara replied, ever the judge. "Brindle doesn't like him," Colt said. "And that dog knows people." As if hearing his name, Brindle lifted his head and let out a low whine, looking between them. "I'll talk to Frank Cotter in the morning," Clara said. "See if I can pull surveillance from the courthouse. If someone's been watching me, maybe there's a trail." What none of them realized yet was that the storm outside wasn't the only one coming, and it was about to hit far closer to home. They didn't know it yet, but what was coming would test everything: the trust between a broken Marine, a paralyzed judge, and a loyal dog that had already defied death once before. That summer storm hit Fort Rock like a hammer. Rain dumped from the sky in violent sheets, turning back roads into muddy rivers. By early evening, the local radio was blaring flash flood warnings, telling folks in low-lying areas to hunker down. Inside her Victorian home, Clara Mae Whitlow flipped through court files as thunder rattled the windows. Across the room, Colt Remington grabbed his toolbox. "I should head out before it gets worse," he said. He and Brindle had spent the day installing a custom shower bench seat, handheld nozzle, anything to give Clara more independence. Clara rolled to the window, watching as the clouds thickened like bruises. "Maybe wait it out," she said. "Forecast says it'll ease by 9. A lightning bolt lit up the yard, followed by a bone-rattling crack. Brindle pressed himself to Colt's leg, letting out a shaky whine. The same dog that had stood his ground under enemy fire now trembled at thunder, a common trigger for combat canines, who carried more than scars. Colt knelt, stroking the dog's back. Easy, bud. Just a storm. And then their phones screamed, the emergency alert flashing bold red flash flood warning. Avoid travel. Well, Colt said, glancing toward the window, looks like I'm staying. Clara smiled. Good, I've got soup. She wheeled toward the kitchen as Colt followed. Pantry's full. Perks of preparing when stairs are your enemy. Together they got to work, her directing him, heating up individual packs of homemade vegetable soup. Brindle curled under the table, still flinching at the thunder rolling overhead. Your place hold up all right during the last big one? Colt asked, ladling soup into bowls. Clara hesitated. The house. Sure. Me. Not so much. I had my accident during a storm like this. Realization clicked in Colt's eyes. I didn't know. Clara shrugged it off. Having company helps. Beats listening to thunder alone, lost in memory. Outside, the wind howled like something feral. Rain slapped the windows like fists. Emergency kit's in the hall closet, Clara said as the lights flickered. Flashlights. First aid, Radio Colt asked. She nodded. I'll grab it just in case. His voice took on that calm, clipped tone, years of training slipping back into place. He'd just found the kit when the lights died. Brindle barked once, sharp-focused. Power's out, Colt called, snapping on a flashlight. Got candles, dining room drawer, Clara replied calmly. Been through this before. Within minutes, he'd lit up the house with battery lanterns and flickering candles. Clara called the power company. Lightning had fried a transformer, knocked out the whole block. They'll have it back by morning, she said, setting down her phone. They camped out in the living room, bathed in warm glow and surrounded by howling wind. Brindle had calmed, resting his head on Clara's lap like it was his rightful place. He's really attached to you, Colt said, watching her run her fingers over the dog's ears. Clara smiled. Mutual, I think. Never saw myself as a dog person. Me neither. Until Brindle. Their conversation wandered her days as a nurse in the service, his boyhood in rural Oregon. Brindle's training, the endless frustration of dealing with the VA. The storm wrapped them in a cocoon, stripping away rank and pain, and leaving just two humans and one remarkable dog trading stories in candlelight. Just after 10, a sudden crack outside snapped them out of their quiet. Brindle shot up, growling low, his whole frame coiled, not scared, but warning. That wasn't thunder, Colt muttered, heading for the window. He parted the curtains and swept the yard with his flashlight. Nothing waited another crack, then shattering glass from the back of the house. Someone's trying to break in, he whispered, instinct snapping him to full alert. Phone, he asked. Kitchen counter, Clara answered. But cell service is trash in storms. Colt handed her a flashlight. Stay here. Clara grabbed his sleeve. This is a bad idea. If someone chose this house, they chose wrong. Colt's voice turned, cold eyes hardening into the edge only war gives. Brindle, stay, he ordered. The German shepherd pressed himself beside Clara's wheelchair, stiff and locked in protection mode as Colt slipped into the dark hallway. He moved like a shadow, even with the prosthetic. No wasted motion, no sound, just decades of muscle memory taking over. Whatever waited in that house, Colt Remington was ready to face it head on. The beam from Colt's flashlight swept across the shattered glass on the kitchen floor beneath a broken window. He caught a sudden motion to his right and pivoted hard. A shadow lunged from behind the kitchen island. Instinct took over. Colt drove his shoulder into the intruder's ribs, and both men crashed to the floor, struggling in the dark. The attacker quickly targeted Colt's left side, clearly aware of his prosthetic. A punch landed square on Colt's jaw, sending him sprawling. The flashlight spun away its beam, casting wild arcs on the ceiling. You should have stayed out of it, Remington, a voice spat familiar and dripping with hate. The man kicked Colt's leg. White-hot pain surged up through the prosthetic socket. As Colt struggled to get upright, the attacker grabbed a heavy glass paperweight from the counter and raised it overhead. But a blur of fur and fury crashed into him. Brindle had broken command. The dog's jaws locked on the man's wrist, drawing a scream of pain as the paperweight clattered to the floor. "Brindle, hold!" Colt barked. Trained to the core. Brindle froze, teeth still gripping but not clamping tighter. Colt scrambled up, ignoring the ache in his jaw, and grabbed the flashlight. He aimed it straight at the intruder's face. Blood streamed from deep punctures in the man's wrist. Rufus Lane Colt growled. The name didn't surprise him, but seeing the confirmation still hit like a gut punch. "Release Brindle." The dog obeyed instantly but stood guard, a deep, low growl vibrating in his chest like a warning bell from hell. "You just broke into a judge's home during a declared emergency," Colt said, voice flat as ice. "That's a felony on top of whatever else you cooked up. This ain't about you," Rufus snapped, cradling his bleeding arm. "This is between me and her." From the hallway came the telltale squeak of wheelchair wheels. Clara Mae Whitlow rolled an expression grim and determined. "Clara, stay back," Colt warned. She ignored him. "Rufus Lane?" she said, voice strong and cold as any verdict. "I should have known." Rufus let out a bitter laugh. "You remember my father, Eli Cormack? You locked him up to die. I sentenced him according to the law," Clara said firmly. "He supplied defective body armor. Soldiers died. He was a patriot," Rufus shouted. "He only rushed production because the army demanded it faster than it could be made. Then they threw him under the bus." Colt clenched his fists. 3 men from my unit dead because of those rushed plates. They weren't just names. They had families, futures. "Collateral damage," Rufus sneered. "That's war. Not when it's from your own side's gear," Colt snapped. He started toward Rufus, but Brindle held his ground between them, fierce, immovable. "What was your plan tonight?" Clara asked sharply. "Break in during a storm. What then? Make it look like a robbery gone bad?" Rufus didn't answer. He didn't have to. "You planned this for years," she continued. "Joining the community council, gaining influence, blocking veteran services, turning people against me, all to isolate me. You should have died in that crash," Rufus said, eerily calm now. "I waited for the perfect storm tonight. I followed you, saw you hauling groceries in the rain." He smirked. "Texted that college kid while he was driving. Just a simple distraction. The truck did the rest." The color drained from Clara's face. You caused my accident." Rufus's voice cracked. "He died in prison. Minor heart attack. They didn't treat it. He would have lived if he'd been home." Colt's face hardened. "That's why you blocked Brindle's treatment. You wanted him to die like your father, of heart failure." A clap of thunder masked the sudden bang of the front door bursting open. Flashlights cut through the dark, followed by urgent voices. Amos Thatcher rushed into the kitchen, flanked by 2 officers. "Colt, Clara!" he shouted, breathless. "You all right? How'd you know?" Colt asked, not lowering his stance. "The cameras," Amos explained. "You set them to feed to my phone. When the power went out, they switched to battery and caught this scumbag sneaking in. No signal, so I drove straight to the station." The cops cuffed Rufus, reading his rights, as he glared at Clara with empty eyes. Clara reached down for Brindle. The dog padded to her side, laying his scarred head gently in her lap. "You saved us," she whispered, hand trembling as it traced the old battle lines along his muzzle. Outside, the storm was passing. But inside that kitchen, the real storm had just been silenced. The thunder had faded to a distant rumble. Through the broken kitchen window, a few stars peeked out between the torn clouds. The immediate danger had passed, but what it revealed would leave lasting marks on everyone present. Clara Mae Whitlow reached for Colt Remington's hand, gripping it with more strength than he expected. "We need to talk," she said softly, nodding toward Brindle. "About what comes next." In that moment, as officers led Rufus Lane away, and Amos Thatcher hovered near the broken window, Colt realized something profound. A disabled judge, a scarred Marine, and a battle-worn dog had become something unexpected, a makeshift family born in chaos but bound by something deeper than blood. The fallout from Rufus's attack brought more complications than they'd anticipated. Even with clear evidence of his intent, the legal process demanded that every move be documented. Statements had to be given timelines, verified, motives scrutinized. Clara, Colt, and Brindle spent hours recounting their version of events to investigators. Though the officers treated Clara with respect, their glances toward Colt carried a different weight, measured cautious, as if PTSD made him unpredictable. "I need to photograph your hands, Mr. Remington," one officer said, snapping pictures of his scraped knuckles. The silent undertone lingered. "Were these wounds from defense or aggression?" Colt deflected, nodding toward the dog curled loyally at Clara's side. "Brindle's the real hero, military trained. He knew the threat before we did." The emergency workers boarding up the shattered window exchanged subtle glances, the kind shared when people try not to voice what they're thinking. A paralyzed judge, a war vet with a combat dog. It was already a subject of whispers in Fort Rock. Now, with Rufus in custody, the gossip would explode. "You should both stay with me tonight," Amos offered, as the police finally cleared out around 2 a.m. "It's not much, but I've got a pull-out couch and room for Brindle." Clara shook her head firmly. "Thanks, Amos, but this is my house. I won't let fear drive me out. I'm not leaving her alone," Colt added without hesitation. "Not until we're sure Rufus acted alone." Amos looked at them both, a slow smile creasing his weathered face. "All right then. I'll bring breakfast in the morning." When he left the house, fell into a deeper silence. The power was still out. Candlelight flickered across the high ceilings and wooden moldings of the Victorian home. Brindle curled into his bed in the living room, while Colt checked the windows and door locks again, hands restless, even though he knew the threat was gone for now. "You can use the guest room," Clara said, wheeling down the hallway. "Extra blankets are in the hall closet." Colt nodded, suddenly aware of how personal this night had become. They'd shared many long days, but nights had always been their separate sacred space. "I'll take the couch," he replied. "Better view of the front door." Clara paused in her doorway, voice low. "Colt, thank you. For tonight. For Brindle. For everything." In the glow of the hallway, candles, the usual titles judge veteran faded away. What remained were just two survivors drawn together by fate and fire. "Get some rest," Colt said gently. "Tomorrow's not going to pull any punches." And it didn't. At 7 a.m., sharp Amos showed up with coffee breakfast burritos and a copy of the Fort Rock Gazette. The front page headline screamed, "Community leader arrested after break-in at judge's home." "It's all over town," Amos said, pouring coffee into chipped mugs. "Storm cut the power, but it sure didn't stop the gossip train." "What are they saying?" Clara asked, scanning the front page with a furrowed brow. Amos hesitated. "That Rufus was obsessed with you. That Colt moved in to protect you. That Brindle's some kind of supernatural creature who sensed it all." "Supernatural," Colt chuckled, rubbing his jaw. "Brindle's something else, sure, but his instincts. That's years of training, not magic." As if knowing he was the topic of discussion. Brindle padded into the kitchen and sat beside Clara's wheelchair, his default position when off duty. "There's something else," Amos said, his voice turning serious. "Rufus made bail this morning. Bail Clara nearly dropped her mug. He admitted to engineering my crash. He broke into my house to hurt me. What judge allows that Judge Silas Thorne, Carleton County?" Amos replied. "They reassigned it because of conflict of interest," Colt muttered. "Let me guess. No prior record, deep community ties, blah blah. Bail was set at $100,000. Amos confirmed. His family paid it without blinking. He's wearing an ankle monitor and under strict orders to stay away from both of you. Colt and Clara locked eyes. Both understood that a restraining order was only as strong as the people enforcing it. "I'm calling Doc Gideon Holloway," Colt said suddenly, jaw set. "It's time we prepared for what's next." Brindle needed urgent evaluation. If Rufus Lane had truly been poisoning him through the water at the community center, the vet's findings that afternoon confirmed what they feared most. Blood work showed traces of a compound not enough to kill outright, but dangerous when paired with a pre-existing heart condition. "It's a slow burn," Doc Gideon Holloway said inside his cramped exam room. "Not lethal in a single dose, but over time it would have triggered a catastrophic cardiac event. Whoever did this, they knew exactly what they were doing." Colt Remington stroked Brindle's coat with a trembling hand. "Can you fix this?" "I already started," Doc replied. "There's no antidote needed. As long as the exposure ends, his system will purge it naturally. I've prescribed heart support meds to help him stabilize during recovery." Clara Mae Whitlow's face had drained of color. "He went after Brindle to get to Colt, just like he went after me, because I sentenced his father." "A calculated vendetta," Colt said darkly. "God knows how many other vets he's harmed through that center." That question hung in the air as they drove back to her home. The power had come back on, but the feeling of violation lingered etched in the boarded window, the rattling locks, and the grim knowledge that Rufus Lane was out on bail ankle monitor and all. "You should stay with me again tonight," Clara said, as Colt helped her from the truck into her wheelchair. "At least until we know he's not violating the restraining order." Colt nodded, watching Brindle scan the front yard, every muscle taut with alertness. "I need to grab a few things from my place." "I'm coming too," Clara said, resolute. "I've been stuck in this house too long. I could use a change of scenery." Colt's ranch house was a stark contrast to hers, where her Victorian home whispered history. His place spoke of transience. Sparse furniture, neutral walls, not much more than the essentials of a man used to moving often and fast. "It's not much," Colt muttered, tossing clothes into a duffel. "It's efficient," Clara replied, wheeling slowly through the living room. She paused by a lone-framed photo Colt in full combat gear, standing beside a younger, leaner Brindle in dusty desert sun. "When was this, Kandahar?" 2013. 2 weeks before the IED took my leg," Colt said, zipping the bag. "Brindle found the device first, gave the signal, but I waved him off, wanted to check it myself." "If you'd listened, maybe you'd still have both legs," Clara said gently. "But maybe someone else wouldn't have lived." Colt nodded, the guilt never far from the surface. "Brindle's never been wrong. I was the one who didn't trust the warning." They were just about to leave when the doorbell rang. Colt raised a hand, motioning Clara to stay back. Brindle moved instantly, positioning himself like a silent wall between them and the front door. Peering through the peephole, Colt spotted Boone McAllister on the porch. He cracked the door just enough. Mr. Remington, the officer greeted, then noticed Clara behind him. "Judge Whitlow, I'm glad you're both here. We've got a situation." Colt let him in. In the modest living room, Boone's uniformed presence made the space feel suddenly tight. "Lane's ankle monitor was tampered with about an hour ago," Boone said flatly. "He's gone. We don't know where." The weight of that news settled like stone in their chests. "He broke bail terms already?" Clara asked, gripping the arms of her chair until her knuckles turned white. "We're searching known contacts and properties," Boone added. "But I came personally to advise caution. Patrols are covering both homes, but our manpower's stretched thin since the storm." After Boone left, Colt went into soldier mode, checking every window, testing locks, closing blinds. He retrieved a pistol from the bedroom safe. "You have a gun," Clara observed. "Afghanistan taught me some lessons," Colt said, sliding the holster onto his lower back. "Sometimes, words aren't enough." "I've never owned a firearm," she admitted. "Always thought it would contradict the bench. Now, I wonder if I was just being naive." They agreed to return to her house, its reinforced doors, and surveillance system gave them a slight edge. As Colt helped her back into the truck, Brindle froze, muscles, rigid, ears upright. "What is it, boy?" Colt asked, instantly scanning the area. The street looked quiet. Too quiet. Colt had learned to trust Brindle's instincts. If the dog was tense, there was a reason. "Let's move. Fast." The drive back was taut with unspoken tension. Colt checked mirrors every few seconds. Clara sat stiffly, hands folded, but trembling slightly. "He's been working on this for years," she finally said. "The crash, Brindle's illness, splitting us apart. What else has he planned?" Colt didn't answer. He was already asking himself the same question. If Rufus Lane's main goal was to take down Clara Mae Whitlow, then it suddenly clicked. "My office," Clara said, her voice sharp with realization. "The courthouse. If he couldn't hurt you physically?" Colt Remington muttered. "Already swinging the truck around. Then maybe he's targeting your reputation, your case files, your legacy." Colt hit the gas. "Call Boone McAllister, have him meet us there." They sped through the quiet streets, reaching the courthouse just as the sky darkened into dusk. The parking lot was almost empty, most employees already home for the night. Colt pulled up near the back entrance, Clara's usual access point for her wheelchair, and quickly helped her out as Brindle took point, his ears high and alert. "He's 10 minutes out," Clara said after hanging up the phone. "And he's bringing backup." "We wait for them," Colt decided. But Clara was already wheeling herself toward the door. "My chambers are on the first floor. If he's in there, every second counts." "Clara, hold on. Let's wait for the police." Colt called, quickening his pace as Brindle trotted beside him. She had already swiped her keycard. The door's lock disengaged with a heavy click. The courthouse, emptied after hours, seemed almost haunted. Only emergency lights lit the marble hallways, casting long shadows. They moved quickly down a side corridor. Clara's voice dropped to a whisper. "Something's not right. The door's open." Colt instantly stepped in front of her, hand raised in a silent order. "Stay back," he told her firmly. "Brindle with me." He approached the partially opened door. From inside came the sound of rummaging, papers flung about, drawers yanked open. Someone was tearing through her office. Colt drew his weapon steady in both hands. "Police are on the way," he called out. "Step out where I can see your hands." Silence. Then a dark laugh spilled from the shadows. "Should have known you'd come chasing Remington." Rufus Lane appeared in the doorway, eyes gleaming, gripping a manila folder like it was gold. "Always the protector, aren't you?" "It's over, Lane," Colt said, unwavering. "Whatever you think you're going to find, it won't save you." Lane held up the folder with triumph. "Judge Whitlow's medical records. After her car accident, she was on opioids. She sentenced my father while under the influence. Impaired judgment. That makes every case she handled that year vulnerable, including his." A sharp voice cut through the tension. "That's a lie." Clara had rolled up behind Colt despite his orders. "I never took opioids during court, and the record proves it." Lane sneered. "Blood doesn't lie. They pumped you full of painkillers and shoved you back into court. My father died in prison because of your decisions." "No," Clara snapped back, calm but fierce. "Your father died because prison health care is broken. And I've been fighting to change that while you and your kind gut funding for reform." Lane's face twisted with fury. Then suddenly his other hand rose from behind his back, gripping a revolver. "Always so righteous," he hissed. "Always sure you're the good one." Colt stepped fully in front of Clara, leveling his weapon. Brindle growled, his body coiled and ready. "Your father broke the law," Colt said coldly. "He cut corners that killed soldiers' men I knew. Clara did her job. She held him accountable." "Shut up!" Lane shouted, hand shaking. "You don't get it. You don't know what it's like to lose family because of someone else's decision." "I do!" Colt shot back, eyes steely. "I lost my entire unit. They died because of your father's greed. I know loss." For a brief second, doubt flickered in Lane's expression, but then it hardened again. "Doesn't matter anymore," he muttered. "None of it does." In the distance, sirens screamed Boone McAllister, and backup drawing closer. Lane's head jerked toward the sound, panic cracking through his rage. "It's over, Ryan," Clara said softly, rolling forward despite Colt's hand trying to hold her back. "You don't have to do this." "Put the gun down," Colt added. "You still have a choice." Lane's eyes darted between them, Colt unflinching and armed. Clara calm in her chair. Brindle a muscle away from launching. Whatever twisted plan he'd clung to in desperation. It was slipping. "My father died alone," he murmured. "He died alone." Rufus Lane whispered, the gun in his hand, dipping just slightly. In a hospital cell, no family allowed. No dignity. "I'm sorry," Clara Mae Whitlow replied, her voice low but steady, full of real compassion. The system failed him at the end, even if the conviction was just. The wail of sirens grew louder, echoing off the courthouse walls. Rufus stared at the weapon as though only now realizing it was in his hand. A tear cut a line down his cheek. He was all I had. Then chaos in a blink. Rufus jerked the gun up, not toward Clara or Colt Remington, but straight to his own temple. Before either could react, Brindle launched forward, a blur of muscle and purpose. His jaws locked on Rufus's wrist, just as the gun fired. Crack! The bullet punched harmlessly into the ceiling. Man and dog hit the floor in a violent tangle. "Brindle, hold!" Colt shouted, diving to secure the revolver. The shepherd obeyed with flawless discipline, clamping down just enough to control Rufus, but never breaking the skin. The hall filled with shouting and heavy boots. Boone McAllister and his team burst into view, weapons raised only to find a scene that looked like something out of a movie. Rufus Lane pinned by a war dog. Colt securing the gun. Clara crying silently in her wheelchair as the past she never asked for came crashing into the present. The storm Rufus had set in motion years ago didn't end in triumph or vengeance. It ended here on the floor of a courthouse, shattered by the strength and loyalty of the very people he tried to break. In the days that followed, Fort Rock's small courthouse became ground zero for a media frenzy. News crews camped out cameras, hungry for a glimpse of the judge, the vet, and the heroic German shepherd. State and national outlets ran with the story, a decorated Marine and his service dog saving a paralyzed judge from a revenge-driven attacker. The sheriff's office sealed many case details, but enough leaked to keep public interest high. Clara took a leave from the bench. On paper, it was for personal reasons. Privately, she was still reeling from Rufus's confession. For 3 years, she'd believed her accident was caused by a college kid texting behind the wheel. Now she knew it had been targeted. Intentional. One evening, she sat on her back porch beside Colt, watching Brindle patrol the fenced yard with slow, precise steps. "How do I live with this?" she asked quietly. "Every choice I've made since the accident was based on a lie." Colt didn't rush the answer. "When I lost my leg," he said, "I spent months asking why. Why that patrol? Why not someone else?" But the why never changed the road I had to walk after. You move forward. You rebuild anyway. Her hand reached for his, their fingers laced together like it had always been that way. "So the cause doesn't matter as much as what I do next?" she asked. "Exactly." He gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "Letting him win now would hand him the only thing he ever wanted to see you ruined." Brindle, sensing her quiet grief, laid at her feet and rested his chin on her shoe. She reached down, stroking behind his ears. "Sometimes I feel something in my legs," she admitted. "More often since you and Brindle showed up." Colt smiled. "Doctors told me I'd always need a cane," he said. "Now I run 3 miles with him every morning. You learn not to believe everything they say is impossible." Later that week, Doc Gideon Holloway met with them privately. "He's been diagnosed with delusional disorder," she said of Rufus. "He'll be involuntarily committed. In therapy, he confessed everything. Years of obsession, stalking Judge Whitlow, sabotaging veteran programs across Fort Rock. He blamed us for his father's downfall," she added. "You, Judge Whitlow, for the sentence. Veterans for testifying. Even the military." And Brindle Colt asked his hand, drifting to the dog. "He believed hurting the dog would crush you more than hurting the judge," said Doc Holloway, reading from her notes. "He thought heart failure was poetic justice, just like what killed his father." Colt's jaw clenched tight. The sheer malice of it hit hard. "Will he stand trial?" Clara asked, her judicial instincts kicking in. "Eventually," the doctor said, "but not yet. And even then, both of you are still central figures in his delusions." She shut her notebook. "I strongly advise ongoing security." They took that advice seriously. Clara's house got security upgrades. Colt's truck was inspected regularly. And Brindle, he never left either of them. What began as a temporary arrangement slowly shifted into something else. Colt never really left. His things made a quiet home within her Victorian walls. Amos Thatcher noticed, but said little, just offered a knowing look and a silent nod. "You two remind me of Clara and myself." Colt. Remington said one quiet evening, setting down a steaming container of beef stew his late wife's recipe now shared, like a memory with every bite. "We started as neighbors," he continued, smiling softly, "then friends. And somewhere along the way, I couldn't imagine my life without her." Clara Mae Whitlow exchanged a quick glance with him, the kind that carried unspoken thoughts. But neither of them dared name what had started to grow between them. They'd both seen too much carried scars, too deep to rush labels on something still so fragile. Meanwhile, Brindle was thriving. During a checkup, Doc Gideon Holloway shook her head in pleasant disbelief. "His heart's recovering faster than I expected. Whatever toxins were being slipped into his water, they're gone now. With the right meds, he's stronger than I'd predicted." As July drifted into the heat of August, Fort Rock settled back into its usual rhythm. The news vans finally packed up, security around the courthouse eased, and the town's attention shifted to newer gossip. But for Clara, things were changing. Her physical therapy ramped up this time under a specialist Doc Holloway had recommended. Neuroplasticity, said Dr. Eli Cormack the first time they met. "After spinal trauma, sometimes the brain reroutes itself if we stimulate the right areas consistently enough. Is that why I'm starting to feel again?" Clara asked, cautious but quietly hopeful. Dr. Cormack nodded thoughtfully. "Could be. Also, when people give up, the brain often dulls incoming signals it deems irrelevant. But hope. Hope has a way of waking things up, and things were waking. Slowly, but undeniably. Pressure, warmth, even discomfort began returning to her legs. By mid-August, Clara could stand briefly between the parallel bars with Colt or Dr. Cormack, steadying her close by. There was one milestone that made Brindle absolutely ecstatic: Clara's ability to toss a ball from her chair. He retrieved it every time like it was the greatest honor a dog could be given. Those backyard play sessions became sacred. Joy barked from the lungs of a once-dying shepherd. Laughter bubbled from a woman who'd once believed she'd never walk again. Colt caught one of those moments on his phone, Clara laughing, as Brindle dropped a soaked tennis ball in her lap, sunlight bouncing off the silver strands in her hair. For the first time in years, her face wasn't lined by pain, but joy. Looking at that image later, something clicked in Colt's heart. He'd fallen for her. Slowly. Then suddenly, like dawn chasing away the longest night. It should have terrified him. Every relationship since his deployment had crumbled under the weight of his PTSD and physical damage. But with Clara, those broken pieces weren't shameful. They were simply part of the whole. Just like her wheelchair wasn't a weakness, it was part of her journey. "Penny, for your thoughts," she said one evening, catching him staring at his phone. Colt hesitated, then handed it over. "I was just thinking how beautiful you look when you're happy." A blush warmed her cheeks, but she didn't look away. "It's been a long time since I felt this way," she whispered. "I'd forgotten what joy even feels like." Silence filled the space between them, charged with everything unspoken. Brindle, sensing the moment, gently pressed against Clara's legs, amber eyes shifting between the two humans, like he was giving them permission. Clara Colt began, voice low and honest. "I know our beginning wasn't exactly conventional. I showed up in handcuffs, then community service, and then Thompson." Her fingers brushed his lips. "I know," she said. "I've known for a while. I was just waiting on you to catch up." Their kiss was soft, inevitable. Not a firework, but a sunrise. And beneath them, Brindle curled up and sighed like a guardian whose mission was complete. But 3 days later, the warmth shattered. Boone McAllister knocked on Clara's door, his badge flashing under porch light, his eyes grim. "He's escaped," he said, voice tight. Thompson overpowered a guard during transfer and took their vehicle. "We've issued alerts, officers are canvassing, but—" Colt was already reaching for the home security panel. "Any leads?" Boone shook his head. "We believe he's still in state. His face is everywhere, but no confirmed sightings yet." Clara's posture didn't falter. Her judge's instincts kicked in like muscle memory. "What precautions do you recommend?" "Honestly," Boone said carefully. "Temporary relocation. He's obsessed with you, Judge Whitlow. And now he's fixated on Colt and the dog, but they stayed. Running would mean abandoning the home Clara had rebuilt from ashes. Instead, they reinforced windows, upgraded cameras, and stationed a patrol car nearby, discreet but constant." That night, Clara awoke with a jolt. The room was silent. The air conditioner hummed like usual, but something was off. Then she heard it. Brindle's low growl rumbled through the hallway outside her bedroom door, the spot he always chose to sleep. "Colt, Clara Mae Whitlow," whispered, reaching toward the space beside her. But he was already moving wide awake, in that soldier's way that never really sleeps. "I hear it," he murmured, grabbing the pistol from the nightstand drawer. "Stay put." "Be careful," she said, reaching for her phone to call the cops. Colt Remington moved like a shadow through the hallway, his footsteps silent as a ghost. Brindle stood at attention, fur-bristling gaze locked on the kitchen. Man and dog crept forward, two halves of one trained instinct. The kitchen seemed untouched, moonlight washing the tiles silver, but Brindle stayed taut, his attention shifting to the back door. Colt eyed the security panel. Green light, still armed, still functional, then a scrape, wood against wood, deckboards outside. Colt edged closer to the door, gun steady, and flipped the backyard floodlight. A sharp buzz, and the yard exploded with white light. There, crouched by the basement window, stood Rufus Lane. Thinner, wilder, a crowbar in hand. their eyes locked through the glass like predator meeting rival predator. Then Rufus turned and ran. Colt moved to chase, but Brindle's bark froze him. Not at the fence, at the window. Colt redirected the light and saw a small metallic device strapped to the gas line. "Clara," he shouted. "Call the bomb squad now." The crude explosive was real, its design sloppy but deadly. It would have ruptured the gas and turned their home into splinters. The bomb tech took it apart piece by careful piece. This thing was live, he told Colt, while red and blue lights flooded the street. If your dog hadn't picked it up, half this block would be rubble. Clara watched from her porch, Brindle pressed close like a silent guardian while officers combed the area. "He won't quit," she murmured when Colt returned to her side. "Not until he's dead or locked away." Colt knelt in front of her wheelchair, took her hands in his. "Then let's make sure it ends. Not by hiding. We draw him out." It was bold. Dangerous. But Boone McAllister agreed. Clara would go back to court, visibly resuming her life, flanked by Colt and Brindle. They'd fake normalcy, set the stage. "Next time he won't play games," Boone warned. "He'll come straight for her." Good Colt said, jaw set. Desperation makes him sloppy. Clara studied both men, warrior and officer, drawn together by strategy and survival. "And what makes you think I'm willing to be bait?" she asked quietly. Colt's eyes didn't waver. "Because you're the strongest woman I know. You don't run. And because when it's you, me, and Brindle, he can't win." The words landed like truth. 3 years in that chair had taught Clara courage wasn't about fearlessness. It was about moving anyway. Rufus had already stolen enough her body, her peace, nearly her career. He wouldn't take her strength too. "Then we do it," she said, one hand in Brindle's fur. "All 3 of us." Morning broke over Fort Rock, long shadows stretching across her yard, as the 3 of them sat on the porch, judge veteran and loyal dog, not victims, but a unit. Her return to the courthouse was a precise operation. Boone McAllister coordinated plainclothes surveillance, flanked by just enough uniformed presence to look routine, but not so much to scare off Rufus. Colt and Brindle walked beside her. Their presence felt casual. Their movements anything but. Her first day back was uneventful on paper traffic tickets, petty disputes, small claims. But behind every normal docket entry was a current of tension. Her colleagues welcomed her back with cautious optimism, having followed the headlines about Rufus Lane and his escape. One man stood out, Hank Dobbs, a retired sergeant now serving court security. He stationed himself outside her chamber door, hand always hovering near his weapon. "You sure about this?" he asked during a break, watching Colt help her down the courthouse ramp. "Using yourself as bait. That's a hell of a play, Judge." Clara's smile was firm. "I've had 3 years to learn this chair, Hank. I'm not about to let one coward dictate how I live." Brindle stayed glued to her side, his training visible in every glance, every pause. He wore a standard vest, but inside was tech GPS alert signals, panic buttons. They were ready. For 3 days, Clara Mae Whitlow's routine held steady. She presided over court. Colt Remington attended each session, all while continuing to fine-tune accessibility upgrades in the courthouse halls. And Brindle, ever watchful, never left her side. Every morning, the trio arrived together. Every afternoon, they left the same way. Predictable. Steady. The kind of pattern a patient predator could follow. On the 4th day, that pattern cracked. A courthouse janitor found a folded note wedged into the cushion of Clara's wheelchair, left unattended just briefly during lunch. The handwriting was the same tight, angry scrawl as the last threat. Justice comes full circle. 3 who thought themselves invincible will fall together. Boone McAllister didn't hesitate. He added 2 more plainclothes officers to the rotation that same afternoon. He's escalating, Boone warned that evening during a strategy meeting at Clara's house. Getting braver. The profile says he'll strike soon, maybe within 48 hours. That night, Colt found Clara alone in her study, poring over old case files from the Eli Cormack trial. Yellow legal pads, highlighted documents, her signature black ink notes curling across the margins. Looking for something specific, Colt asked, setting a warm mug of tea at her elbow. Clara sighed and slipped off her reading glasses. Trying to figure out what I missed. There were so many red flags about Eli's business cut corners, ignored warnings, fake safety data. Colt's jaw clenched. The body armor case. I testified during the inquiry. What he did cost lives. I lost men because of those lies. Clara tapped a page. His son Rufus Lane refuses to see it that way. He believes his father was railroaded. And sometimes, delusion grows from a sliver of truth. She paused, unsure. I keep wondering if I misread something. If I'd shown a bit more humanity, would Rufus have spiraled this far? Clara, Colt said gently, taking her hand. You handed down justice. You didn't create his obsession. His father's actions killed real people. That's the reality. Clara nodded slowly, though her eyes still held a storm. The next morning, summer rain fell in sheets, drenching the town and turning courthouse steps into hazards. Clara used the rear ramp entrance instead. The break from routine unsettled Colt. This path's got too many blind spots, he muttered, maneuvering her chair through a quiet service corridor. Brindle led paws clicking on tile ears, twitching, nose twitching harder. Too quiet. Too empty. I'm not canceling court, Clara said firmly. He's not going to own my decisions. Colt didn't argue. He just kept one hand close to Brindle's vest where the emergency signal waited under Velcro. The corridor opened into the main hallway near her courtroom. Hank Dobbs waited there, nodding as they approached. Morning, Judge, he said, swinging open the courtroom door. Light day 3 cases. Clara wheeled herself in with practiced grace. Colt and Brindle took their usual place in the back row, always watching, always ready. First 2 cases uneventful. A shoplifting charge with court-ordered service. A minor property dispute settled with Clara's steady wisdom. Then came the third, a simple probation violation. As the names were called and attorneys approached, Brindle tensed. Ears up, nostrils wide. Colt leaned in. What is it, boy? Nothing in the room seemed off. The defendant looked bored. The prosecutor flipped pages. Clara scanned the file with focus. Then came something Brindle never did during court, a low whine. Colt's fingers slid to the button on the dog's vest. Not pushing, but ready. The courtroom doors opened. A man stepped in, soaked from rain. Long coat, hat low, face down, eyes on a phone. Clara spoke, addressing the defendant. Mr. Peterson, this is your 2nd probation violation in 3 months. While I understand the difficulty of Brindle growled. A deep, rumbling growl that turned heads. And in the blink of an eye, Colt saw it. The curve of the jaw. The gait Rufus Lane, he shouted, lunging from his seat. The man's hand emerged from the raincoat, gripping a revolver. Chaos detonated. Spectators hit the floor. The bailiff, Frank Cotter, drew his weapon. Hank Dobbs sprang forward. Colt crashed into Rufus as the shot fired splintering wood above Clara's head. And Brindle. He soared over the courtroom rail, a flash of muscle and fury, jaws clamping down on the shooter's wrist with soldier-trained precision. Colt Remington wrestled the gunman down with the raw strength and discipline honed from years in uniform. Rufus Lane thrashed beneath him, shouting in wild, guttural bursts, his eyes ablaze with something feral. "Dad! Dad! I'll finish it for you. I'll make it right." The madness spilled from his lips, broken and raw. The second shot rang out sharp and clean. It came from Hank Dobbs, the retired officer whose instincts hadn't dulled with age. He'd found a clear line and fired. The bullet slammed into Rufus's shoulder, jerking him sideways. The revolver clattered across the floor. "Brindle, hold!" Colt barked, and the shepherd clamped his jaws on the man's pant leg, firm, immovable, but merciful. The courtroom had emptied. Frank Cotter, the bailiff, was already on the floor, helping Hank secure Rufus in cuffs. Through it all, Clara Mae Whitlow had rolled her wheelchair from behind the bench, coming to face the man who had nearly taken her life. Her voice was calm, almost mournful. "Rufus, it's done now. Your father's case is closed. This road you're on, it doesn't end in honor, just more hurt." Rufus blinked through the blood seeping into his shirt, confusion and rage battling across his face. "You don't get it," he rasped. "They told me to do it. Said it was the only way to clear his name." Clara stayed a safe distance, but her eyes held his. "Who told you?" His voice dropped to a whisper. "The voices. My dad's. Every night. Since he died. He tells me what to do." The paramedics arrived. So did Boone McAllister with his tactical team sweeping in like a storm. Rufus Lane was cuffed and carried out his wound, stabilized, the threat finally contained. As the chaos quieted, Boone walked over to Clara Colt and Brindle relief washing over his face. "Could have been a whole lot worse," he muttered, reholstering his sidearm. Guy had another piece and 3 pipe bombs in his car. He wasn't planning to walk out of here, and he sure wasn't going to let any of you walk out either. Colt dropped to his knees beside Brindle, running his hands over the shepherd's body, checking for wounds. There were none. He pressed his forehead to the dog's neck, overwhelmed. "Good boy," he whispered. "The best boy." Clara's hand landed gently on his shoulder. The touch said more than words ever could: gratitude, fear, relief. The weight of survival shared in silence. Brindle leaned into her wheelchair, uniting them in one unshakable triangle. The days that followed moved faster than expected. Rufus Lane was transferred to a hospital under armed watch. Doctors diagnosed him with severe, untreated paranoid schizophrenia, worsened by the grief of losing his father. Prosecutors filed charges, attempted murder assault, weapons violations, but it quickly became clear this wasn't going to prison. This was heading toward psychiatric care. When the DA met with Clara privately, she spoke plainly. "The man who tried to kill me needs help more than punishment," she said. "Yes, he's dangerous, but he's also sick, and part of justice is recognizing the difference." It was moments like that when Colt remembered exactly why he'd fallen for her. Clara's version of justice wasn't cold or vengeful. It was deep, messy, real. She understood the gray. 2 weeks after the shooting, as summer began to lean toward fall, Clara got unexpected news. Doc Gideon Holloway, her physical therapist, sat across from her with a soft smile and a stack of test results. "Your latest scans are in," he said. "You've regained about 30% sensation below the T10 vertebra. That's pretty incredible." Clara's hands gripped her chair. Hope flickered behind her eyes. "And motor control." "It's coming," the doctor nodded. "The standing exercises are working. I can't promise a full recovery, but with continued therapy, and maybe some support, bracing short distances on foot aren't out of reach." That evening on her front porch, Clara and Colt shared a quiet dinner under the sky turning copper and lavender. He raised his glass toward her. "To second chances." She smiled, adding, "And to Brindle, the matchmaker no one expected." As if on cue, the shepherd lifted his big head and laid it gently in her lap. His eyes flicked between them with an expression that could only be described as proud. "You know," Colt mused, "there's a program out in Arizona works with wounded vets. They need someone with military K-9 experience to run it." Clara's brow arched. "Are you applying?" "Thinking about it," Colt admitted. Then softer. "But only if you'd come with me. All three of us. New place, new chapter." The question lingered in the warm desert air. Clara looked out at the setting sun. The past here was heavy, her injury, the attack, the courthouse. But the idea of a fresh start, that had a pull. "Arizona, huh?" she murmured. "Dry heat might do my joints some good. And I hear they need good judges, too." Colt's heart beat faster. "Is that a yes?" She turned to him, eyes misty but clear. Let's figure it out together. Because whatever's next, I want you and Brindle with me for it." As night settled over Fort Rock, a judge, a veteran, and one loyal dog found peace bound not by tragedy, but by healing hope and a love that neither time nor trauma could shake. Their future might not have a clear path, but they were walking into it side by side, sometimes on 2 legs, sometimes on 4, sometimes on wheels, but always without fail, as a family born from hardship and held together by something deeper than fate. In the hush of the evening, Brindle gave a long, contented sigh and let his eyes drift shut. His mission, as far as he knew, was complete. From soldier to savior, from battlefields to courtrooms, from war hero to healer of broken hearts, his journey had been nothing short of extraordinary, just like the 2 humans he'd chosen to stand guard over. And in the soft rhythm of their breathing, Colt Remington's steady exhale and Clara Mae Whitlow's quiet strength, Brindle heard not an ending, but a beginning. A story still being written. Sometimes life shifts in a heartbeat. It did for all 3 of them, a battle-scarred veteran, a paralyzed judge, and the dog that refused to give up on either of them. Their story is proof that healing wears many faces and often walks in on paws, not feet. The most unbreakable bonds are forged not in perfection, but in pain, through shared scars, quiet resilience, and the decision to rebuild when all seemed lost. Clara had been told her legs would never feel again. But they did. Colt had buried his hopes for love deep beneath years of grief, only to find it blooming on a front porch under the desert sky. And then there was Brindle, the one who didn't speak, but understood everything, who never needed words to show faith, loyalty, or belief in what they could still become. Because truth is tragedy may be where a journey starts, but it sure doesn't have to be where it ends. There are always pages waiting to be turned if you're brave enough to reach for the next one. What surprising connection brought healing into your life? When did you discover a strength you didn't even know you had? Drop your story in the comments. Someone out there might need exactly what you've lived through.